morning. Hope everyone had a beautiful and uplifting Pesach. We're continuing with the laws of Sfira, the laws of counting, the Omer. And we are in the Mishnah Berurah, if you're following along, Siman Taf Pei Tes, 489. And we're at the Mishnah Berurah, Sifkat and Zayin, the Mishnah Berurah in number 7. So we mentioned last time that when we count the Omer, we count the 49 days from the second day of Passover until Shavuos. We count up to the receiving of the Torah. And when we count the days and we count the weeks. So today is the 8th day of the Omer. So we said today is the 8th day, which is 1 week and 1 day of the Omer. And we're going to see why. It says the Mishnah Berurah, Dechsiv tisbru chamishim yom. The Torah says you should count 50 days. Uksiv shiva shavuos tisper lecha. And it says 7 weeks you shall count. So we see that the Torah says to count days and to count weeks. It records both. Ve'im siper yomim lechud v'lo hiskir shavuos. So let's say, what happens if you only counted the days and not the weeks? Let's say you said today is the 8th day of the Omer, and that's all you said. So yesh omrim sheyatza b'diavad. So some say that you fulfill your obligation b'diavad, that if you already did it, you fulfill the obligation. Yesh omrim shetzarach lachzor v'lispor yomim v'shavuos kedin. And some say you have to go back and count again days and weeks. Va'al kein chozer v'sofer b'lo bracha. So what should we do practically? If someone just said today is the 8th day of the Omer, and he didn't say weeks. So, since there's a debate, if he fulfilled his obligation, he should go back and count again with days and weeks. He should go back and say, today is the 8th day of the Omer, which is 1 week and 1 day of the Omer, and he should do that without a blessing, because we're not sure if he already fulfilled his obligation with the first counting without mentioning the weeks. Ve'im shachach lachzor v'lispor. Now let's say he did not go back and count. Monashar Yomim Bebracha. If he didn't go back and count, if he just said today is the 8th day of the Omer and he didn't mention weeks, can he continue counting Sfira with a bracha? Because something that we mentioned, we'll get to this later, is that if a person forgets to count 1 day of Sfira, then he cannot continue counting with a bracha. And the reason for that is according to some, the mitzvah of Sfira, how do we view it? Is it 49 separate mitzvahs to count every single day? Or is it one big mitzvah to count every day? So according to that second way of explaining it, that it's one big mitzvah, if you forget 1 day, then you lost out on the mitzvah. So you can no longer continue counting with a bracha because your mitzvah is incomplete and you can't make a blessing on an incomplete mitzvah. So says the Mishnah Berurah here, so that's if you forget a day. Now, here we didn't forget a day, we just said we only fulfilled our obligation according to some opinions. We said today is the 8th day of the Omer, and we didn't mention the weeks. So according to one opinion, we fulfilled our obligation. According to another opinion, we did not fulfill our obligation. So can we continue counting with a bracha? So the Mishnah Berurah says, yes, you can continue counting with a bracha. Now what about the opposite case? Let's say you just mentioned the weeks, but you don't mention the days. Let's say it's the 7th day of the Omer, and you said, Hayom Shavua Echad, today is 1 week. That's all you said. You didn't mention 7 days, you just said today is 1 week of the Omer. Lo Hisker Yomim Klal, L'Kuliyam Oliyatza. So there, everybody holds you didn't fulfill your obligation. So if you said days without weeks, there's a debate if one fulfilled his obligation. If you just said weeks without days, everyone holds you did not fulfill your obligation. So then the Ramah said, or the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah said that we say the word at the end, we say today is 8 days ba omer with a bays. Says the Mishnah Berurah, uberov poskim hanusach la omer. Most opinions hold la omer with a lamed. You'll see in different sidurim, different customs. Some say ba omer, some say la omer. I personally say ba omer. So whatever your custom is, you can follow it. Interesting thing that the Dirshu brings from Rosh Zalman Auerbach, that he used to count both. He used to count one time with La Omer and one time with Ba Omer, but he didn't instruct others to do that. Just an interesting tidbit. Miu, Ikar Davar Zeh Ina Ela Lechatchila. He says this whole thing of with a Beis or with a Lamed, Ba Omer or La Omer, that's just Lechatchila. That's just initial practice. Kedei Lavar Shehu Mona Miyom Shekriva Asa Omer Vala Ve'im Lo Amar Ela Hayom Kach V'Kach Namiyatz. He says, according to the letter of the law, if you just said today is 8 days, and you didn't mention the Omer at all, you didn't say La Omer, you didn't say Ba Omer, you just said today is 8 days, which is 1 week and 1 day of the 1 day, and you didn't say anything about the Omer, he says you also fulfill your obligation. It's just lichatchila to mention the Omer, to mention that this counting is referring to the Omer. Okay, Ubi Yom Hashmini, Vim Lo Amar Ela Hayom Shmona Yamim, V'lo Siyim Shehem Shavua Echad, Nami Yatsa. If you just say today is 8 days and you don't finish with saying that it's 1 week, you also fulfill your obligation. Shari Hisker Shavuos Etmol B'Yom HaShvi, because you mentioned weeks. You mentioned the weeks the day before. V'chein im lo amar ela hayom Shavua Echad v'Yom Echad. Let's say you only say today, on the 8th day, you say today is 1 week and 1 day of the Omer. So do you fulfill your obligation like that? You didn't say it's 8 days. You just said today is 1 day and 1 week. B'lechud Nami Yatsa. He says you also fulfill your obligation. Because you already mentioned the days, the previous days when you were counting. You already said today is day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. You should say the word in Hebrew you should say is Shavua Echad and not Shavua Achas. You should you say it with a Dalet and not a Ches. Sorry, with a Suf. You should use the phrase Shnei Shavuos and not Shtei Shavuos. The Shavua Lashon Zachar, because the word week is masculine, is the masculine form. Adasar Omer Yamim, until 10 days you say Yamim. Echad Asar Ve'elech Omer Yom, and from the 11th day on you say Yom. Now you don't need to worry about this because this is all in the Siddur printed correctly, so just read what it says in the Siddur and you'll be okay. Assuming it's a reputable Siddur, which most probably are. Kenya Shlomer. Minyan Hamuad Mitchila, you should say the smaller number first. Kigon Echad ve'esrim Yom. So when you're counting the 21st day, you don't say 20 and 1, you say 1 and 20. So it's Echad ve'esrim Yom. He said all these things that he was just mentioning, these aren't absolute requirements for the mitzvah. This is just to do it in the most clear wording possible. There's a custom to say after we count Yehi Ratzon Sheibana Beis Hamikdash. So if you look in the Siddurim, there's a Yehi Ratzon to say that we daven that the temple should be rebuilt. The reason is we're counting the Omer. The Omer was a sacrifice which is brought in the temple. So we can't bring that sacrifice anymore. We can't bring that offering, in the temple because we don't have a temple. And according to many, the mitzvah to count Sfira is only rabbinic in origin nowadays because we don't have the temple. If we have the temple, then everyone would hold it's a Torah commandment. And we could also bring the offering. There's a custom to say this psalm after. That's also printed in the Siddur. All of this stuff is printed in the Siddur. The Latter-day Authorities write, if you say it in a strange wording, a different wording, you also fulfill the obligation. What's his example? His example is, let's say it's the 39th day of the Omer, and you say, today is 40 minus 1. So if you say today is 40 minus 1, you also fulfill your obligation. So again, the best practice, what to do, is just read what it says in the Siddur, and you'll be fine. Okay, with that, wishing everyone a beautiful day.